Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Ned Bellavance, Ned1313 on Twitter, and welcome to the Daily Check-in for June 11th, 2020. It's Thursday, and that means it's Thursdays on the Edge. This is part of a series where I talk about what's going on with edge computing. And in this episode, I want to dissect the edge terminology a little bit. An updated version of some of the edge terminology just was published this week from at the LF Edge, or the Linux Foundation Edge Consortium. I don't know exactly what their structure is, but it recently was published by them, and I think it really finally. This probably won't be the last iteration of the terminology, but I really like their newer approach, and I think it makes a lot of sense to me. So I want to dive into that a little bit. Before we get into that, I would like to do a few housekeeping things, or actually just two. So the first thing is my Edge colocation key criteria report just got published by GigaOM. So if this is of interest to you and you're curious what's going on with edge colocation, and I'll clarify what that is as we dive into the terminology a little bit, there's a whole report out there for you. And I'm wrapping up the radar report this week, which will be the companion to that, that takes a look at the vendors in the colocation space. So if that's of interest to you, head on over to GigaOM. I'll include a link in the show notes and you can check it out. The other thing is I've been considering how I should structure things because I have Terraform Tuesday and now I have Thursdays on the Edge. Do I want to do a series on other days as well, just to keep it consistent in case there's a particular area that interests you the most? And I think I'm going to do that. So my tentative idea is that Mondays will be reserved for professional development and personal growth. So if there's a topic that I have that is around that area, I'm going to do that on Monday. There's already a playlist that's all about professional development. So that's just going to be Mondays. So if you're interested in growing your tech career, that's the thing that engages you, that keeps you excited and interested. Mondays are going to be your day for that. Wednesdays, I'm thinking about doing tech analysis. So sort of a weekly tech analysis of something that's come up during the week. I'll dive into it. Or if somebody suggests a topic that they'd like to think what's my analysis on that particular topic, Wednesdays are going to be the day for that. And I already have a playlist for it, so it'll just get added into the playlist. So if there's a specific thing that's interesting you, now you know what day to tune in on. Friday, I'm going to call Funky Friday. Could be anything, and it doesn't have to be tech related or professional development. I might want to talk about making sourdough bread for 10 minutes, and that's what Funky Friday is going to be all about. And as you know, the last Friday of every month is Ask Me Anything. Okay, so that's my housekeeping items. I want to check in with you. How are we doing? It's Thursday. Thursdays are good. It means it's almost Friday. It's almost the weekend. I get excited because it's Thursdays on the Edge, and I'm deep into that. But, I want to make sure that you folks out there are doing okay. And if you feel like you need something, that you can reach out to me. I have an open ear. I'm very approachable. If there's a question you have, if you just want to be heard, hit me up on Twitter, hit me up on LinkedIn, or leave a comment, and I am happy to respond and, chat things out if that's what you need right now. So I just want to put that out there. Now let's talk about dissecting the edge. Wow, we're already 4 minutes in, so this is going to be a quick primer, but I think it's really interesting the way that LF Edge has broken down the terminology. So there's a whole idea behind how terms could be defined for different technologies, and sometimes it's very vendor driven. Like when VMware came out with all of their stuff, or when Microsoft came out with all of their stuff, they got to set the language and the tone for a lot of what they came out with because they were the dominant force. Right now, we don't have that dominant force for edge computing, so it's up to committees like LF Edge to try to standardize some of the terminology before the vendors get their hooks too deep into it, which is a weird balance because a lot of the people on the committee come from vendors, but they're trying to approach it from sort of a vendor neutral perspective. Now, they've outlined broadly two different categories of edge, and a lot of it has to do with where things exist in the continuum of edge. You've got your user edge, and user edge stuff is dedicated to a specific tenant. So it's not going to be a multi-tenant environment, and it's probably owned and operated by that tenant. So think of a manufacturing line. Think of embedded compute devices in an office building. Generally, those are going to be owned by the office building or by the manufacturing company and operated by them. And they're edge devices in the sense that they could be running on some sort of small circuit board, really restricted devices, or something like a gateway device that is dedicated to that tenant. So that's sort of one end of the spectrum. And then the other end of the spectrum when it comes to edge is as we move to bigger environments, less resource constrained, now we're talking about the service provider edge. The service provider edge is going to be a shared environment. So it's probably going to be multi-tenant. It doesn't have to be. You could have an edge colocation site that's dedicated to just one customer, but the capability of being multi-tenant is there. And generally speaking, the tenants are not operating the facility or operating the service. It's going to be some other company that's offering things as a service. And they could be offering a bunch of different things as a service. For instance, you could have edge colocation vendors that are offering a facility that has networking, power, and cooling available for you to consume. That's one level in the stack. Above that level, you could have another company that's providing the bare metal servers and maybe hypervisors for you to use to deploy your edge platform on top of. So you can rent that bare metal. And that's something I actually have done recently for a project I just did, was spinning up bare metal servers through Packet. And those are actually slightly larger data centers, but the idea is out there, right? And then above bare metal hypervisor operating system layer, what you might call IaaS in the cloud world, you could have another layer where someone is offering platform as a service, a deployment platform for your applications. You can imagine it could be running something like Kubernetes, but it doesn't have to be. But that part is abstracted away from you. You package up your application in the way that they ask you to, probably containers of some kind, and then they run the application wherever that is. And they are the intermediary between the edge colocation provider and you. So they're providing that application as a service, that platform as a service for your application. And then finally, you have the layer above that. If you're running an application at the edge, you might be offering a service to customers, say gamers, for instance, who would be consuming that service that's running as applications through another service. So there's a whole bunch of layers here that are potentially there for the service provider edge. But as you move closer to the edge devices, that shrinks down and we get into the single tenant user operated sphere. And so LF Edge has broken that into 3 categories for the user edge. They've got constrained device edge. Those are devices with very constrained amounts of compute and storage and memory on them. We're talking something smaller than a Raspberry Pi. It might only have 256 meg of memory, very little onboard storage, and it's capable of running a very basic program. There's no virtualization there. There's no containers. Everything's just running right on that device. So if you think of a printed logic board that's running on a manufacturing line, that's the constrained edge, very, very small devices. Then you move up to the smart device edge. And now we're getting into something that has a little more capability. It could run containers. It could run virtual machines, maybe. And that's your smart device edge. Your smartphone's a great example of that, but also IoT gateways or ruggedized PCs that are running that have a little more capacity. It's not a server, but it has the capacity to run these additional things. And then you move one step up from that, you have your on-prem data center that's at the edge. So this would be, if you've ever gone into like the telephone closet at an office building and it's got like 2 servers sitting in a telecom rack, that could be your data center edge. It's not necessarily a full-blown data center. It's a constrained environment, but it's somewhere where you could have full racks of servers and gear there that's running some sort of process. but it's still very close to the end devices, less than a kilometer. So that's sitting at that on-prem data center edge. So those are the divisions there. That's going to be owned and operated by the user. Now we're bleeding into the last mile network. Going beyond the last mile network, you have what's called the access edge. And so these are slightly larger sites that are in that edge colocation arena. They're going to be less than 10 kilometers or maybe less than 20 kilometers from the edge user edge that they're communicating with. So the latency is super low. You could potentially get sub millisecond latency from these access edge, but they're going to be still a little bit constrained, and they're going to be sitting either at like a telco CO, a central office, or it could be under a cell phone attached to a cell phone tower. Could be many different places where that access edge is going to exist. And then finally, you've got the regional edge. And the regional edge is going to be more than 20 kilometers from all of the devices that are using it, but it's going to be more of a traditional colocation data center that has some edge capabilities because of the software it's running. And it's going to be like a direct peering site to other clouds and other internet exchanges. Beyond that, you get into centralized data centers and actual cloud providers. So that's kind of the full gamut, the full spectrum of what we're talking about when we talk about the edge. And there's a lot of detail within each of those. So when we talk about edge, and when I'm talking about edge, I have to be more specific about what area within this continuum I'm talking about, because there is a ton there. In the same way that you can't sum up cloud computing by just pointing at Microsoft Azure, like one data center, and saying that's cloud computing, you also can't just point at a cell tower with some servers in the base station and say that's edge computing, because there's so much more to it than that. So hopefully that's helpful as we're making distinctions and growing our knowledge around edge and what the potential applications are. I think next week I'd like to get into some of those use cases. What are people think they're going to use this for, and then what is the reality? So that's everything I've got for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back tomorrow for a Friday wrap up for the week.